Hello folks, Halcylan here. The impossible just happened because for the first time in my life, an indie developer decided to offer me exclusive media access to their upcoming game titled The Viking Way. What a mistake they made. Now, my job today is simply to put the game on your radar and present it to you as it is, with the good, the bad and the janky, but before I give you my honest opinion on this title, we need to take a reality check and realize what times we're living in. 2020 may have been shit, but from my perspective as a gamer, it was quite an amazing year. I finally got to play Bannerlord after waiting it for 8 years, and Cyberpunk, which I've also been anticipating for the past 7 years, is right around the corner and it keeps me going. When you consider that the release date of these two behemoths is in 2020, you have to understand that everything else is going to feel underwhelming in comparison, including today's game, as well as Ubisoft's upcoming release, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Speaking of which, the game I'm presenting today might just scratch your itch for a Viking game until Valhalla comes out. So what I will try to do is presenting the Viking Way in an objective manner to the best of my ability, and then you can decide whether it's something you want to spend €15 on. Before we begin, one final disclaimer. Today's video was not in my production schedule. I can barely squeeze it in between my main projects, so I cannot give the Viking Way the fair coverage it deserves. As such, most of the footage presented today is from my 4-hour session with the game. With that out of the way, let us talk about The Viking Way, which is bound to launch on the 10th of October on Steam Early Access. So, if I harshly criticize some gameplay aspect, we must keep in mind that it will probably improve by the time the Early Access period ends and the game reaches version 1.0. But at the same time, we need to be realistic and remember that certain Early Access games never made it, so let us hope that will not be the case with the game I'm presenting today. At first glance, you might think that The Viking Way is another Mount&Blade clone. You're absolutely right. In fact, KK Softworks have previously developed another Mount&Blade type of game, but set in a modern setting akin to the Yugoslavian civil wars, titled Freeman: Guerrilla Warfare. If you like the idea of Mount&Blade with guns, you should look up videos of Freeman and see if you like it. I personally enjoyed my time in that game, even though it was a bit rough around the edges. But to stay on topic, and I repeat myself, yes, this game clearly draws inspiration from Mount&Blade. You're a hero who commands an army and marches it across an overworld map, and when you engage in battle, you switch to a third-person view of your character as you fight enemies and order your troops on the battlefield. At the end of the battle, you take the loot, which you can then sell to the nearest settlement for large piles of cash. You already know the formula which was set 12 years ago by the original Mount&Blade. But does the Viking Way bring anything new to the table? I would say yes it does, to a small degree. First of all, the game does not take place on land but on water. More specifically, you'll be sailing your fleet across the North and Baltic seas, engaging in trading, raiding or conquest upon the coastline. Your party size is also not determined by the fame of your clan, as it is in Bannerlord, or by your leadership skill, as it is in Warband. Instead, your Viking army is only limited by the type of ship you have, the improvements built upon it, or by the number of vessels in your fleet. You can only lead a maximum of 5 boats at any time, so choose wisely what kind of fleet you want, whether you're going to specialize in sea battles, raids, conquest or trading, as some ships are better at some jobs than others. Some are faster, others offer more cargo capacity, and a few models can carry more troops. Secondly, unlike in Bannerlord, you have direct control of your flagship instead of clicking on the map and waiting for your army to arrive to its destination, so you have to learn to navigate. That's actually pretty easy. You steer the ship with A and D, and you adjust the sail with W and S. And if you properly align your sail with the direction of the wind, you'll accelerate to your ship's maximum speed, which increases if you upgraded your sails at the nearest shipyard. But sometimes you have to sail against the wind, which is where your oars come in, so you better have upgraded those as well. While we're at it, let me explain the rest of the sailing controls before we move on. Most importantly, your ship always moves forward, its speed depending on the upgrades and the direction of the wind, as I've said. But you can bring your ship to a full stop by dropping the anchor, which is necessary when you're collecting loot, or trying to adjust your course so that you'll land in a settlement and not crash upon the coastline. But if the latter happens, don't worry, the game will prompt you to reset your position on the sea. So in a way, it's retard proof for people like me who can't sail for shit. And crashing into the coastline causes no damage to your ship, so that's nothing to worry about. But if any other ships are around, you should take care because a collision will damage both ships. And if your hull already has a few cracks in it, that collision could sink your ship and spell game over and you'll have to start a new campaign. Or just reload the game you saved, which by the way can only be done inside of friendly settlements you visit. I was confused at first and thought that the saving and loading mechanics were broken, because when I first saved my game, it was done at sea, and I did not bother to read this tooltip. I simply thought the tooltip said, "Game successfully saved," but when I reloaded and saw that this happened, I thought the game was broken. But no, I actually had to read the notification again, and then I saw that your progress can only be saved inside of a town, or a village, or a monastery. Which, by the way, can be raided if you have the manpower for it, but until you get to that stage, you'll need to pick on smaller targets and build up your wealth, so you can then invest into more ships, which offer more crew capacity, which means more soldiers for your raids upon whatever faction you don't like, or upon bandit hideouts. But Vikings weren't just mindless hulking brutes. Some of them were explorers, while others would be traders, and if you've watched my Bannerlord content, you know how much I love doing the latter. But trade in the Viking Way does not have the same depth as in Bannerlord, or other games I've played. There is no simulated economy with peasants that produce goods in their village to take them to the nearest town, and there are no caravans who roam the map in search of profits. Nope, a town sells some goods and demands others, and that's the end of it. As an example, one decent trade route I discovered was buying jewelry in the town of York for 360 silvers, and then selling each piece in Ribbe for 662 coins, basically doubling my money. But taking one type of item from one town and selling it to another is not really worth the time you spend traveling, so if you're planning to engage in commerce, you'd best come up with some trade routes so that you can buy something in one town, sell it in the next, and make a profit in each settlement you pass through. If I were to make a trade guide for this game, which I won't, the guide wouldn't involve too many strategies like the ones I've made for Bannerlord as an example. It would simply be a matter of finding out what you can cheaply purchase in one city, where to sell it for most profit, and checking each village to see its products, so you can make a purchase and then sell them to a city that pays the best price. But you can't outright see these settlements, so you'll have to discover them first, and once you do, they'll be marked on your navigation map. If you didn't discover a whole lot of towns, all you gotta do is follow these dotted lines and see where they lead. On the map you'll also see differently colored territories which represent the dominion of each of these factions. You wanna find out more, just click on this button. As I've said, you can choose to raid these factions, and doing so is very profitable, so as soon as you've amassed a decent amount of money, it's time to invest into a ship or two, fill them with soldiers and start attacking villages. A few decent soldiers can cut a swath through these peasants, and at the end, you can get a lot of good stuff which you should actually sell into a friendly town. You may also sell into a village, but you would get less money for all the hard work you've done. If you choose to be a raider, which is far more profitable than trading, I have a few tips for you. Have one ship dedicated entirely to carrying more people, and another that's stacked with cargo containers, so you can actually take all the loot and not leave anything behind. After a few raids, you'll be a rich man in no time, and you can use that wealth to buy even more ships, upgrade them further, and increase the size and effectiveness of your army, and when you feel ready, you can go back to the faction you've been raiding and take their town for yourself. Once you do, you can then invest a couple of silvers into the city's development, which pays off through more tax revenue being paid to you on a monthly basis. I also recommend you to upgrade your soldiers as soon as possible in order to maximize their effectiveness in combat. And you can make them even deadlier if you invest all of your attribute points into intelligence, which will give you more skill points, and then you can dump those skill points into land combat to heavily increase the damage dealt by your soldiers in these battles. You should also recruit this Eric fellow from the first town you spawn in, because he's another hero whose skills affect your entire team. You can either specialize this boy into trade or navigation, or make him a jack of all trades if you so desire. One complaint about him though, he looks nothing like his Tinder profile. In fact, he looks a lot like the main character, Ragnar's son, who unfortunately cannot be customized. But the game is in super early access, maybe character customization will come around in a future patch. But there is one important aspect that I haven't yet talked about. Combat. Let's begin with naval combat and continue talking about ship controls. Actually, let's start with a fair bit of criticism. If you look closely, you may notice that controlling your ship on the open seas is nowhere as exciting as in Sea of Thieves or Assassin's Creed Odyssey. In fact, it's a very bare-bones system, the whole game is, that's the idea of early access, but it serves its purpose of getting you from one place to another. But it's still better than Mount&Blade Viking Conquest. Honestly, I found naval combat to be rather unpleasant when I was controlling nothing but my flagship, and the AI was clearly better than me. The best thing you can do during naval combat is to rush the enemy ship headfirst and board them, engaging in a land combat scenario, but if the enemy is too fast, you will need to learn how to properly use your ship and defeat your enemies. The reason I found it unpleasant was that I had to constantly spin my ship around the enemy, spin the sail to catch the wind and give me a speed advantage, and then I had to spin the camera by holding my middle mouse button to actually keep eyes on the enemy. And while I'm doing all the spinning, I'm expected to land my arrows accurately on the enemy. But if you know what you're doing, you can sink enemy ships without any risk to your soldiers, and then you can collect loot from wherever it drops. You may also upgrade certain ships with a ballista, which is far more powerful, but also more expensive. Or you can do the 300 IQ move of buying multiple ships, and when you see an enemy fleet arriving, move your vessels into an ambush position and use your flagship to draw the enemy straight into the line of fire of your other ships. After all, the AI has much better aim than us players, and only overwhelming firepower can guarantee that you win the day. You may order your other ships individually by pressing each corresponding key or selecting them all with tab. Then you may either issue orders such as follow, stop, or move to position, which is how you prepare the ambush in the first place. When you're sailing, I suggest you order your ships to follow, and if they do, when you enter a settlement or you raid a town, all of your ships teleport to you and you may make use of all of your soldiers. But if one of your ships sinks, say goodbye to whatever cargo it was carrying as well as the sailors aboard. And if you happen to lose your flagship, you will manage to swim to another one of your ships and survive, while your Viking brothers somehow drown. But if you happen to lose all of your ships, your character will perish and your legend will be over. So just reload your latest save when you lose your first ship, because that shit's expensive and soldiers don't grow on trees. Well, in Viking lore, all 9 realms rest upon the branches of Yggdrasil, so who knows, maybe they literally do. One last thing about sea battles. If you board an enemy and you completely wipe him out, you can then board the empty vessel again to add it to your fleet, assuming you have the space. And now for the main attraction, land combat. In my opinion, the melee combat could be summarized in one sentence. Meh, I've seen better. If I could compare it with other games, it reminds me a bit of Conan Exiles because each weapon has 2 different attacks with different effects, while some of the animations remind me of Morrowind. The character movements are stiff and the walking animation makes you look like you just dropped a log in your trousers. I'm really hoping this is just their first iteration and the developers plan on improving the look and feel of combat, because right now I'm not a big fan. I mean, it works, but I'd rather just abuse the enemy AI, make them follow me, and then order my soldiers to tear them to pieces while I gleefully watch the clumsy massacre unfold, so yeah. But who knows, maybe I just don't see the beauty in it. I'm not a professional game reviewer after all. But that's the trick in reviewing early access games. I can't talk about the bad too much because throughout the game's development, many things could be improved. But getting back to combat, I don't actually have any tips to offer. I simply kept clicking and it kept working. And when my health was getting low, I backed off and blocked attacks while waiting for my soldiers to fight in my stead. But once I bought a good set of armor, it all changed, and I could just rush an enemy and click him into oblivion. My advice is to forget about fighting yourself. Just make sure your army outnumbers your enemy, and your soldiers aren't mere peasants. And if you've also got the right skill points, every fight should be a breeze. One thing though, don't fall in battle, otherwise, your soldier's top priority is to carry your unconscious body out of there and offer you first aid, and the enemy would have won. You can try to get back into the fight once your health regenerates, but if you fall in battle during a boarding operation, it's game over for you. Oh, one more thing about land combat. When a battle starts, your weapons are sheathed. You can draw them and prepare for combat via the 1 or 2 keys. Yes, you can have 2 different weapons. But when a battle starts, I recommend you leave your weapons sheathed and get the enemy to follow you at a snail's pace, while you run circles around them and your archers shoot. But once you draw your weapon, you cannot sheath it back for the remainder of the fight. Well, that's all I had to say about combat. In a nutshell, use the AI to advance your goals and do nothing yourself, except leading your heathen army to glory. There's several aspects in the game that I haven't interacted with, such as women. From my limited observation, there's also a dating sim portion of this game, where you get to talk to these beautifully painted ladies, learn about their personalities, goals, aspirations, and what extravagant gifts they require. And of course, once you learn that a lady needs some makeup or a fancy new dress, you can shamelessly become a simp and spend your entire life savings on that gift milady desires. I never got that far. It was a lot easier for me to build an army of Vikings and conquer several towns than wooing the ladies, seeing how a simple gifts cost 80,000 silvers and you need to buy more than one to prove that you're husband material. But to each their own. This is a sandbox game, and if you want to buy a diamond ring with all the money taken from 1,000 villagers you murdered, who am I to stop you? Now, before we end this review, if you wanna call it that, I still got a few more things to say. See, I nearly forgot to mention this, but don't you forget about buying supplies. Your Vikings don't require daily wages like in Bannerlord, all you gotta do is keep them fed. Luckily for you, every time you leave a settlement, you'll be prompted with a question. Do you want to refill your supplies before you leave? Just say yes. Once you do a few raids and get some coin, this will be an insignificant amount of money. Now, for another bit of criticism. At the moment, the world feels rather empty. In my 4 hours of playing this game, I spotted like maybe 20 fleets. Most of them were bandits whom I boarded and executed, but I did not see a whole lot of fleets that belonged to the other factions. And most notably, I have not seen any fleet belonging to the factions I chose to raid. Nobody to intercept me, or hunt me down, or protect their domain. All of those monasteries and villages were left to fend for themselves against my Viking raiders, and their towns were taken as soon as I managed to put together a ragtag group of marauders. In the words of the famous Ragnar Lothbrok, it was as easy as taking them from babies. And now that I owned those towns from this interface, I deduced that I should be able to station a garrison here, but I have no idea how. But as I've said, I don't fear retaliation at the moment because I haven't seen a single enemy ship patrolling the coast. So what use is a garrison anyway? I suspect this is another thing the developer will have to fix in time as the game gets fleshed out. Speaking of fixes, it would be nice to be able to rebind my keys, you know. All of them preferably. But the Viking Way also has some positives. For starters, it runs pretty damn smoothly and I've personally never had a game crash in 4 hours. From my limited experience, this is the most stable early access game I've ever played. Now, I have chosen to play it on medium settings because I don't think my old PC can handle high graphics anymore without catching fire, but even so, it looks decent compared with other games that launched in early access. And yeah, it's janky as fuck, but for a game in this stage, that's quite normal. There's also a few grammatical mistakes, but that's an easy fix. And if you look hard enough, you can see the wisdom in these quotes. A new month begins. Many towns has fresh goods arrived. Oh, and I don't know if the devs fixed this by the game's launch, but in the pre-release version I played, I could not lower the game's sound from the main menu. I needed to lower it from my Windows volume mixer. Anyway, such is the nature of early access. I may have been a bit harsh in some parts of my review for this game, but I can only review what's in front of me, not what will be. I mean, the game definitely has potential, all the bones are in place, but the meat of the game kinda needs to hit the gym. The developers have quite a long and tough road ahead of them, but with enough hard work and perseverance, I could see the Viking Way become quite an enjoyable game. Or it could become another one of the countless early access titles that sunk to the bottom of the sea. I sincerely hope that will not happen, but only time would tell. I have been asked to put this game in front of you, and that's exactly what I've tried to do. An unbiased assessment, nothing more, nothing less. And if I weren't given a free review copy for this game, and I would randomly find a recommended video talking about it, I would definitely put it into my Steam wishlist and keep an eye on it, see how the development goes. I personally enjoy playing Mount&Blade clones and seeing what new mechanics they bring to the table, such as guns or ships. But that's all I had to say. This video is not my best piece of work since it wasn't even in my schedule, but as I've said, I just wanted to put this game on your radar and who knows, maybe you'll enjoy it or maybe you'll refund it after an hour and 59 minutes. Or simply let it sail by. But I think reviewing someone else's work is quite a big responsibility because I don't want to mislead you guys into thinking a game is better than it actually is, but I also don't want my video to reflect badly on the game and do more harm than good to the developers that trusted me to fairly review their game. To be honest, I'd much rather have a review copy of Cyberpunk, so I can praise the fuck out of it, but I'm not big enough for CD Projekt Red, so I do what I can. I experiment. I'm not a game reviewer, I'd much rather stay in my lane making guides for games I love. Well, I could go on talking about this subject, but my job here is done. I hope at the very least you've enjoyed this video. As for Bannerlord content, it will continue until I get my hands on Cyberpunk on the 19th of November or maybe earlier, who knows.
Wink wink.
Thank you very much for watching and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.